Imagine Europe in the early 1900s. It's a time of great change and uncertainty. The continent is a patchwork of powerful empires and emerging nations, each with its own ambitions and fears. It's a continent bristling with armies, each nation building up its military might in preparation for potential conflict. Military parades are a common sight, showcasing the strength and discipline of the troops, and buzzing with diplomatic whispers. Behind closed doors, diplomats and politicians engage in intense discussions, negotiating treaties and alliances that could shift the balance of power. But beneath the surface, a web of alliances is growing, tying nations together in complex and potentially dangerous ways. These alliances are meant to provide security, but they also create a fragile network of obligations, tying nations together in complex and potentially dangerous ways. Leaders sign agreements, pledging to come to each other's aid in times of crisis. These pacts are seen as a way to deter aggression, but they also mean that a conflict involving one nation could quickly escalate. On one side, you have the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. These nations, bound by their agreements, form a powerful bloc in Central Europe. They share common interests and a desire to protect their territories. These powers pledge to support each other in case of attack. Their military leaders meet regularly, coordinating strategies and ensuring that their forces are ready to act at a moment's notice. Facing them is the Triple Entente: France, Russia, and Great Britain. This alliance is formed in response to the growing power of the Triple Alliance. These nations, though diverse in their cultures and interests, find common ground in their desire to counterbalance the influence of their rivals. They too promise mutual assistance should war break out. Their diplomats work tirelessly to maintain the unity of the alliance, knowing that their combined strength is their best defense against potential threats. These alliances, meant to deter aggression, instead created a hair-trigger situation. The intricate web of treaties and agreements means that any conflict, no matter how small, could set off a chain reaction, drawing multiple nations into war. Any conflict, however small, had the potential to drag all of Europe into war. The mobilization of troops and the stockpiling of weapons create an atmosphere of tension and anticipation, as everyone waits for the spark that could ignite the powder keg. And in the Balkans, a region simmering with ethnic and political tensions, that small conflict was brewing. The complex mix of nationalities and historical grievances makes the Balkans a hotspot for unrest, and it is here that the first flames of war will eventually ignite. Nationalism, the intense pride in one's nation, was sweeping across Europe. People demanded self-rule and celebrated their own cultures. This was particularly true in the Balkans, where different ethnic groups chafed under the rule of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At the same time, imperialism, the drive to acquire colonies and expand empires, fueled rivalries between European powers. Germany, a rising industrial giant, sought its place in the sun. This meant challenging Britain's dominance at sea and expanding its colonial possessions. These ambitions brought Germany into conflict with Britain and France, who already possessed vast empires. The stage was set for a showdown. All that was needed was a spark. That spark came on a sunny morning in Sarajevo, Bosnia. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were touring the city. A young Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, saw his chance. As the Archduke's car passed by, Princip fired 2 shots. Both Ferdinand and Sophie were killed instantly. The assassination sent shockwaves across Europe. Austria-Hungary, outraged, blamed Serbia for harboring terrorists. Germany, bound by its alliance, pledged its full support to Austria-Hungary. Russia, sympathetic to Serbia, mobilized its army. The delicate balance of power, carefully constructed over decades, was about to shatter. The month following the assassination was a whirlwind of diplomatic activity. Frantic telegrams flew between capitals as leaders tried to avert disaster. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, issued an ultimatum to Serbia, demanding impossible concessions. Serbia, backed by Russia, attempted to negotiate, but was met with intransigence. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The dominoes began to fall. Russia mobilized in support of Serbia, prompting Germany to declare war on Russia. France, honoring its alliance with Russia, declared war on Germany. And when Germany invaded neutral Belgium on its way to France, Great Britain declared war on Germany. Within a week, the great powers of Europe were at war. Section 5. Europe at war declarations and mobilization. Across Europe, the news of war was met with a mix of fear and fervent patriotism. Young men, eager to prove their courage, flocked to recruiting stations. They believed the war would be over by Christmas. They were tragically wrong. Millions of soldiers were mobilized and sent to the front lines. Germany, following the Schlieffen Plan, aimed for a swift victory in the West by knocking France out of the war before Russia could fully mobilize. They would then turn their full might against Russia in the East. However, the plan relied on speed and underestimated the fighting spirit of the French and British armies. Section 6. Western Front trench warfare and stalemate. The war on the Western Front quickly bogged down into a brutal stalemate. This was a new kind of warfare, one that the world had never seen before. The soldiers on both sides dug in, creating an extensive network of trenches that stretched for miles. From the Swiss border to the English Channel, a complex network of trenches snaked across the landscape. These trenches were not just simple ditches. They were elaborate systems with front-line, support and reserve trenches, connected by communication trenches. The land between the opposing trenches was known as no man's land, a deadly expanse filled with barbed wire and landmines. Millions of men faced each other across a narrow no man's land, defended by barbed wire, machine guns and artillery. The conditions were harsh and unforgiving. Soldiers had to endure the constant threat of enemy fire, as well as the psychological strain of living in such close quarters with death. Attacks were met with withering fire, resulting in horrific casualties. The tactics of the time were ill-suited to the realities of trench warfare. Commanders often ordered frontal assaults, leading to massive losses. The Battle of the Somme, for example, saw over 1 million men killed or wounded, with little ground gained. Battles like the Somme and Verdun became synonymous with unimaginable slaughter. Verdun in particular was a symbol of French determination and German frustration, with both sides suffering enormous casualties over several months of relentless fighting. Life in the trenches was a nightmare of mud, rats, disease and constant shelling. Soldiers had to deal with trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure to damp and unsanitary conditions. The trenches were infested with rats, which fed on the corpses of fallen soldiers. The constant shelling created a state of perpetual fear and anxiety. Yet, despite the horrors, both sides held firm. The soldiers showed remarkable resilience and determination. They developed a sense of camaraderie and brotherhood, relying on each other to survive the daily horrors of trench life. Letters from home, small comforts and moments of humor helped them endure. The war on the Western Front would drag on for 4 long years. The trenches became a symbol of the futility and devastation of war. Despite numerous attempts to break the stalemate, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Western Front remained locked in a deadly embrace until the armistice in 1918. Section 7. Eastern Front mobility and crushing defeats. Unlike the static Western Front, the Eastern Front was characterized by greater mobility. Vast distances and fewer fortifications allowed for sweeping offensives and counter-offensives. Here, Russia faced the combined might of Germany and Austria-Hungary. The Russians, despite their numerical superiority, were hampered by poor leadership, inadequate equipment and logistical problems. They suffered a series of crushing defeats at the battles of Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes. Millions of Russian soldiers were killed, wounded or taken prisoner. Section 8. A new kind of war, technology's deadly impact. World War I witnessed the introduction of new technologies that would forever change the face of warfare. Machine guns, capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute, mowed down attacking infantry. Artillery, more powerful and accurate than ever before, rained down death from afar. Poison gas, a terrifying new weapon, choked and blinded soldiers. Tanks, slow and unreliable at first, offered a glimpse of future warfare. Airplanes, initially used for reconnaissance, soon engaged in dogfights and bombing raids. These technological advancements made World War I the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. Section 9. Versailles and beyond, legacy of the Great War. After 4 long years of war, Germany, exhausted and facing defeat, signed the armistice on November 11, 1918. This moment marked the end of one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, a war that had engulfed nations and continents, leaving a trail of destruction and sorrow in its wake. The guns fell silent on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. This silence was a stark contrast to the relentless noise of battle that had dominated the lives of millions for years. It was a moment of profound relief and reflection, as soldiers and civilians alike grappled with the enormity of what had transpired. The world rejoiced, but the cost of victory was staggering. Millions lay dead, empires had crumbled, and Europe was in ruins. The celebrations were tinged with grief and loss as families mourned their loved ones and communities began the arduous task of rebuilding. The war had left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the world. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended the war but sowed the seeds for future conflict. The treaty was a complex and contentious document, shaped by the competing interests and desires of the victorious powers. It aimed to ensure lasting peace, but instead created a fragile and unstable foundation for the future. Germany, blamed for the war, was forced to accept harsh reparations and territorial losses. These punitive measures crippled the German economy and fueled a sense of injustice and resentment among its people. The treaty's terms were seen as a national humiliation, and this collective anger would have far-reaching consequences. The treaty left Germany humiliated and resentful, creating fertile ground for extremist ideologies like Nazism to take root. The economic hardship and political instability of the post-war years provided a breeding ground for radical movements, and the promise of restoring national pride and power resonated deeply with many Germans. World War I, the war to end all wars, had failed to achieve its goal. Instead of ushering in an era of peace, it had left a legacy of bitterness and division. The war's devastating impact was felt across generations, as the memories of the trenches and the fallen haunted those who had lived through it. Instead, it set the stage for another, even more devastating global conflict just 2 decades later. The unresolved issues and deep-seated grievances of the post-war period would erupt once more, leading to World War II, a conflict that would surpass even the Great War in its scale and horror. The legacy of the Great War is a sobering reminder of the fragility of peace and the enduring consequences of conflict.